Now, as you have just witnessed, Final Fantasy XIII is a spectacularly good-looking game. While it may not run at 1080p or have copious amounts of anti-aliasing, the environments simply look stunning. Lush, rich, vibrant. They feature almost every colour in the spectrum instead of just brown. Each one of these seem to explode with life. The most amazing thing about all these environments, however, is that there's a million of them. Where in other games, there might be a single inspired environment which simply takes your breath away. Final Fantasy XIII will present you with a new one every hour for the most of its 60 hours of duration. This constant environmental splendour comprises a very important element of Final Fantasy XIII, being its sublime pacing. Ditching the random battles and open environments of past Final Fantasies, this intensely linear game is immaculately well paced, as the developers know at all times what you're doing and how you're going to be feeling. 15-minute cutscenes were traditionally doled out at the narrowest point of previous Final Fantasies, as a large area would condense down to a single boss fight and you'd have a 15-minute cutscene on either end of the boss. These are split up into 15 separate 1-minute cutscenes, which are peppered throughout the areas, each separated by 2 or 3 minutes of combat. This helps to avoid the traditional problem that Final Fantasies have had, where there's story sections and gameplay sections, and they feel entirely disparate, leading you to feel less interested in both. Instead, through the tight weaving of combat, cutscene, and the visual rewards, Final Fantasy is a very easy experience to simply lose yourself in for hours at a time. Now, the story in Final Fantasy XIII is pretty odd. In the beginning, it shows a lot of promise, with separate intersecting pairs of characters, dramatic tension between party members, and a promising narrative device in which characters' motivations are not explicitly explained and are instead tied up in the 13 days preceding the game's beginning, which we begin to slowly unravel as time progresses. This is really interesting. However, over time, it comes to incorporate all of the worst stereotype about Japanese fantasy plots. The dramatic tension between characters dies away, and it becomes very hard to engage with its loose thread of double crossings, as they're all perpetrated by a genocidal pope who leaves no room in the story for any ambiguity about who's the bad guy. You don't really care if you've been double-crossed if you knew this person was Satan from the beginning. The dialogue is cringeworthy, and there are members of your party who you will simply want to disown because their lines are terrible and the actors deliver them real bad. Come prepared with some music and a good audiobook, maybe a podcast, because some of this you will simply want to turn on the subtitles so you can pay attention, but not really engage with any of it. The start, as I said, is interesting, however it really does trail off. Of course, you don't want to block out any of the music, however, because there are gems like this throughout the soundtrack. Now, the combat system is essentially just Reductionist's approach to Final Fantasy, relegating your role from choosing moves for characters to instead simply switching out the flow of combat, changing all your party to damage dealers, changing some of your party to medics, and then letting them manage themselves in battle. On paper, this sounds like it could lead to a very fast and elegant battle system, where your simplistic inputs have very complex consequences in the battlefield, and there can be more parameters which you have to consider because you don't have to spend quite as much time thinking about what you're actually going to do. However, this doesn't end up happening. Too often, these battles are really simplistic, and there are lots of ones which can be won by simply staying in the default stance throughout the battle, achieving an optimum 5-star ranking, which is really disappointing. At times you feel like you're just there to hit the X button as fast as possible. However, occasionally there are some really interesting fights which require you to switch up your paradigms, which are the name of these class systems, switch your paradigms up constantly, and really stay aware of lots of changing things throughout the battlefield. Mostly, though, it doesn't live up to its promise. Despite my frustration with this, and it is a really intense frustration. Throughout the game, I constantly felt myself feeling as if I'd been cheated by this battle system which had all this promise and then didn't deliver on it. I was incredibly satisfied by the combat in this game. It's really empowering. None of my critical thought process can really reconcile my frustration of the battle system with my fondness for it, but it is a really great battle system, although it feels like it should have been so much more. Final Fantasy XIII is an incredibly solid game, although it has a lot of flaws that are impossible to overlook, particularly the narrative, which is a core driving device in games, just fails to come together in any meaningful way and really dies halfway through the 60-hour plot. You could fit an entire fantastic plot of Red Dead Redemption into the areas in which Final Fantasy essentially has no plot, or worse than that, has plots so bad you wish it had no plot. It's really sad because it starts out really well, and then as the combat system gets better in the second half of the game, the plot gets really awful, so you sort of never get the two at the same time to be the experience that Final Fantasy XIII should have been. Regardless, the pacing is sublime and the visual splendor really makes this game worth playing. 60 hours is a lot of time to invest, and truth be told, for most people, is far more important than the money you'd spend on the game, but it is worthwhile. I have been Aeon, talking for Gamecrux, and for more better articulated thoughts about Final Fantasy XIII, you're going to want to bash Gamecrux.com into your web browser and check out the text which is an accompaniment to this video thing. Enjoy your day.